The smoke came first, rolling across the Colorado sky like a living thing, turning the sun into a blood-red coin hanging low over the mountains. Natalie Morrison stood on the porch of her ranch house outside Fort Lyon, watching the horizon darken with a growing sense of dread that tightened around her chest like a fist. She had seen wildfires before in the summer of 1879, but never one that moved this fast. Never one that seemed to eat the distance between the high country and her land with such terrible hunger. Her father had died 3 months ago, leaving her the ranch and all its responsibilities at 22 years old. The neighboring ranchers had looked at her with a mixture of pity and skepticism, certain that a young woman alone could not manage 300 acres, 40 head of cattle, and the endless work that came with living this far from town. She had proven them wrong through sheer determination and dawn-to-dusk labor, but now nature itself seemed determined to test her in ways no amount of stubbornness could overcome. The wind shifted, bringing the acrid smell of burning pine and sage. Natalie's hands gripped the porch railing hard enough to make her knuckles white. The only road connecting her ranch to Fort Lyon ran through Copper Canyon, a narrow passage between 2 ridges that funneled travelers through a corridor of scrub oak and juniper. If the fire reached the canyon before she could get out, she would be trapped with no way to escape and no way to get help. She turned and ran inside, her boots echoing on the wooden floors as she moved through the house that still smelled faintly of her father's pipe tobacco. She grabbed her father's old leather satchel and began stuffing it with whatever she thought she might need. Matches, a knife, dried beef, a canteen. Her mind raced through impossible calculations. The fire looked to be maybe 5 miles out, moving fast with the wind at its back. She could saddle her horse and try to outrun it. But what about the cattle? What about everything her father had built? A knock at the door startled her so badly she dropped the canteen. It clattered across the floor as she spun around, her heart hammering. Nobody came out this far without good reason, and the nearest neighbor was the Hendricks place, a good hour's ride to the east. She opened the door and found herself staring at the broad chest of the largest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span the entire doorframe. His hair was dark brown, hanging past his collar in waves that suggested he cut it himself when it got too long to be practical. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but she could see the sharp lines of his jaw beneath it. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and intense, taking in everything about her in a single sweeping glance. He wore buckskin clothing that had seen hard use, and a rifle was slung across his back alongside a pack that looked like it held his entire life. "You need to leave," he said without preamble. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling down a mountainside. "Now!" Natalie bristled at the command in his tone, even as part of her recognized he was right. "Who are you?" "Holt Kincaid. I was tracking elk in the high country when the fire started. I have been moving ahead of it for 2 days. He stepped closer and she caught the smell of wood smoke clinging to him. "That fire is moving faster than any I have seen. It will be here by nightfall, maybe sooner. The canyon road is already burning." Her stomach dropped. "The canyon is on fire? Started about an hour ago." The wind pushed a wall of flame straight through it. His eyes were steady on hers, and she saw no fear in them, only grim certainty. "There is no way out by road. Then I am trapped." The words came out flat, emotionless, her mind refusing to fully process what that meant. "Not if you trust me." Holt shifted his pack higher on his shoulder. "There is another way down from the high country. Game trail that cuts through the mountains and comes out near the river, about 3 miles south of Fort Lyon. It is rough going, steep in places, but it will get you clear of the fire." Natalie looked past him at the smoke darkening the sky. She could see orange now, glowing beneath the black clouds. The fire was close enough that she could hear it, a distant roar like an approaching storm. "I do not know you. Why should I trust you?" Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile but close. "Because you do not have another choice, and we are running out of time to argue about it." He was right, and they both knew it. Natalie made her decision in the space of a heartbeat. "I need to get my horse and whatever supplies I can carry. Make it quick. We have maybe an hour before the wind shifts and brings the fire straight down on this place." Holt followed her around the side of the house to the small barn where she kept her mare, a steady gray named Juniper. "You have cattle?" 40 head in the east pasture. "Open the gates before we go. Give them a chance to run." He was already moving toward the fence line, his long legs covering ground with surprising speed for a man his size. Natalie watched him for a moment, this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere to help her, then turned her attention to saddling Juniper as fast as her shaking hands would allow. The leather straps felt clumsy in her fingers. She forced herself to slow down, to do it right. A loose saddle could kill her as surely as the fire. If Juniper stumbled on the mountain trail this man was proposing they take. Behind her, she heard the creak of the gate opening, then Holt's voice calling out to drive the cattle through. The animals scattered, sensing the danger in the air, their hooves thundering across the dry ground as they fled. Natalie led Juniper out of the barn and found Holt waiting, his eyes scanning the approaching fire. The wind had picked up, hot and fierce, and embers were starting to fall around them like deadly snow. One landed on the barn roof, and she watched in horror as it began to smolder. "We go now," Holt said. He started walking north, away from the ranch house toward the mountains that rose up like a wall behind her property. Natalie followed, leading Juniper, her throat tight with the knowledge that she was abandoning everything her father had built. The house where she had been born, the land he had worked himself into an early grave to keep. "I am sorry," Holt said quietly, and she realized he had been watching her face. "But things can be rebuilt, you cannot." They walked in silence as the land began to rise, the flat prairie giving way to rocky slopes covered in sparse grass and scattered pine. Holt moved with the easy confidence of a man who had spent his entire life in the wilderness, picking a path through the terrain that looked random but always seemed to find the easiest route. Natalie struggled to keep up with his long strides, but she refused to complain or ask him to slow down. The fire behind them was motivation enough. After 30 minutes of hard climbing, Holt finally stopped beside a small stream that tumbled down between two massive boulders. "Water your horse," he said, "and drink something yourself. It is going to get harder from here." Natalie let Juniper drink while she knelt beside the stream and splashed cold water on her face. The smoke was thick even up here, and her lungs felt raw. "How do you know about this trail?" "I have been living in these mountains for 3 years. I know every game trail, every water source, every cave big enough to shelter in." He crouched beside her, filling his own canteen. This close, she could see the scars on his hands, the weathered lines around his eyes that came from squinting into the sun. "Before that, I was a scout for the Army out of Fort Larned, Kansas. Before that, other things." "What made you leave the Army?" His jaw tightened. "I got tired of killing people for reasons I did not understand or agree with." He stood abruptly, ending that line of conversation. "We need to keep moving. The fire will hit your ranch soon, and when it does, it will create its own wind. That will push it faster up the mountain." They climbed higher into country that grew increasingly wild and beautiful despite the smoke that hazed the air. The trail Holt followed was barely visible, more a suggestion of a path than anything else, winding between boulder fields and stands of aspen that glowed gold in the strange filtered light. Several times they had to dismount and lead Juniper over obstacles, and Natalie found herself grateful for the endless ranch work that had kept her strong. She could not imagine trying to make this journey soft-handed and unused to physical hardship. "Tell me about your father," Holt said, during one particularly steep section where they had to pause to let Juniper catch her breath. "How long ago did you lose him?" The question caught her off guard. 3 months. His heart gave out while he was mending fence on the north property line. She looked back the way they had come, but smoke obscured everything now. He bought that land in 1862, right after the Homestead Act passed. Built everything from nothing, and now it is all burning. Land survives fire, grass grows back, trees grow back. What matters is that you survive to see it. Holt's hand came to rest briefly on her shoulder, heavy and warm, then pulled away. He would want you alive more than he would want the building standing. They pushed on through the afternoon, the light fading not from the approach of evening, but from the smoke that now blocked out the sun entirely. Natalie's legs burned with exhaustion, and her throat was raw from breathing the acrid air. Juniper was stumbling, and she knew they could not keep up this pace much longer. As if reading her thoughts, Holt stopped and pointed ahead to where a dark opening showed in the cliff face. "Cave," he said. "We will wait out the worst of it there. The fire will not climb this high. The rocks will protect us." The cave was deeper than it looked from the outside, extending back into darkness that smelled of stone and old animal dens. Holt built a small fire near the entrance using deadwood he found nearby, and Natalie unsaddled Juniper and rubbed the mare down with handfuls of dried grass. The simple, familiar task steadied her nerves. "Here." Holt held out a piece of dried meat and a biscuit that looked like it had been made days ago. "Not much, but better than nothing." Natalie took the food gratefully and sat down near the fire, feeling the adrenaline that had been sustaining her finally begin to drain away. Her hands were shaking and she clasped them together to hide it. "Thank you for coming to get me. You could have just kept riding and saved yourself." Holt settled across the fire from her, his face half in shadow. "I saw the smoke and knew which way it was heading. I knew there were ranches out that way, knew someone might need help." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Truth is, I did not expect to find you alone. Where are your ranch hands? Your family?" "There is no one else. Just me. I have been managing on my own since my father died." She heard the defensive note in her voice and tried to soften it. "I know what people think, that a woman has no business trying to run a ranch by herself, but I can do it. I have been doing it. I do not doubt it." Holt's gray eyes reflected the firelight. "Takes a certain kind of strength to stay when everyone expects you to fail. I respect that." Something warm bloomed in Natalie's chest at his words. She realized she had been bracing for skepticism or condescension, the reactions she had gotten used to from the men in Fort Lyon. Instead, this mountain man who barely knew her offered simple acceptance. "What about you?" she asked. "You said you have been living in the mountains for 3 years. Do you not get lonely, sometimes?" He fed another stick to the fire. "But loneliness is better than being surrounded by people who see you as nothing but a weapon to be pointed at their enemies. In the mountains I am just a man. I hunt, I trap, I live by my own rules. No one tells me who to fight or why. That sounds like freedom. It is, most of the time." His eyes met hers across the flames. "But sometimes you save a woman from a wildfire, and you remember why human connection matters." The air between them suddenly felt charged, heavy with things unspoken. Natalie looked away first, her cheeks warming in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. "How long do you think we need to stay here?" "Until morning. By then the main body of the fire will have passed, and we can make our way down to Fort Lyon." He pulled a blanket from his pack and held it out to her. "You should try to sleep. I will keep watch. You need rest too. I will rest later. Right now, my job is making sure you stay safe." There was something in his voice, a note of protective determination that made her breath catch. She took the blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders, feeling the weight of exhaustion pulling at her bones. Outside the cave, the world glowed orange and red as the wildfire consumed everything in its path. Natalie lay down near the warmth of the fire, using her saddle as a pillow, and closed her eyes. She expected fear to keep her awake or grief for everything she had lost, but instead she felt an odd sense of peace. Holt Kincaid was a stranger, but something about his solid presence made her feel safer than she had felt in months. She drifted toward sleep, listening to the crackle of the fire and the steady rhythm of Holt's breathing, and her last conscious thought was that she was grateful he had been the one to ride through the smoke to find her. Natalie woke to birdsong and the pale gray light of dawn filtering into the cave. For a moment she lay still, disoriented by the stone ceiling above her instead of the familiar wooden beams of her bedroom. Then memory crashed back in, and she sat up abruptly, her heart pounding. Holt was crouched near the cave entrance, looking out at the changed landscape. He turned when he heard her move. "Morning, how do you feel?" "Like I ran up a mountain yesterday." Natalie stood, wincing at the stiffness in her legs. She joined him at the entrance and caught her breath at what she saw. The world below was transformed into a blackened wasteland, smoke still rising from the charred remains of what had been forest and prairie. In the distance she could see the skeletal outline of her barn, still standing but stripped of its roof and walls. "I am sorry," Holt said quietly. Natalie swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. "You warned me, and you saved my life. I have no right to complain. You have every right to grieve what you lost." He stood and she was struck again by his sheer size, the way his presence seemed to fill the space around him. "But we should head down while the air is still relatively clear. More smoke will rise as the day heats up." They set out, and the descent proved in some ways harder than the climb had been. The trail was steep and treacherous, forcing them to pick their way carefully over loose scree and around rockfalls. Holt stayed close to Natalie, always positioning himself downhill from her so he could catch her if she stumbled. His hand steadied her elbow more than once when the ground shifted unexpectedly under her feet. "You are good at this," she said, during one particularly tricky section where they had to edge around a sheer drop. "Taking care of people, I mean. Making them feel safe." "Spent a lot of years doing the opposite," Holt replied, his voice grim. "Figured I owed the universe some balance." She wanted to ask what he meant, what shadows haunted him from his time in the army, but the careful set of his shoulders told her the subject was closed. Instead, she focused on putting one foot in front of the other, trusting him to guide her down the mountain. By mid-morning, they had descended below the worst of the smoke and into country that the fire had not reached. The contrast was jarring, moving from charred devastation into land still green and alive. They followed the game trail down to a river that ran swift and clear, its banks lined with cottonwood trees. "This is Fountain Creek," Holt said. "Follow it east about 3 miles, and you will hit Fort Lyon. I will guide you to where the road is." Natalie looked at him sharply. "You are not coming with me?" "I do not do well in towns. Too many people, too many questions." He would not meet her eyes. "You will be safe now. You do not need me anymore." Something close to panic fluttered in Natalie's chest. The thought of him simply disappearing back into the mountains, of never seeing him again, felt suddenly unbearable. "Wait. You cannot just leave. I do not even know how to thank you properly." "You do not need to thank me. I did what anyone would do." "No." She stepped closer to him, forcing him to look at her. "You did what most people would not do. You risked your life to save a stranger. That means something." Holt's jaw worked, and she could see him wrestling with something internal. Finally, he said, "What do you want from me, Natalie?" The use of her first name sent a little thrill through her. "Come to town with me, at least long enough to resupply, get a hot meal. You have been living on dried meat and biscuits while getting me to safety. Let me repay that much." He hesitated, and she pressed her advantage. "Please, I do not want to say goodbye yet." The last sentence slipped out before she could stop it, too honest, too revealing. But instead of retreating, Holt's expression softened. "All right, I will come to Fort Lyon with you, but I am not staying long." They walked together along the river, leading Juniper between them. The mare had recovered from yesterday's ordeal and moved with her usual steady gait. Natalie found herself acutely aware of Holt beside her, the way his hand would brush against hers accidentally, the way he angled his body slightly toward hers as they walked. She had been alone for so long, focused so completely on survival and proving herself, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be near someone who made her heart beat faster. "Tell me about Fort Lyon," Holt said. "What is it like? Small? Maybe 200 people counting the soldiers at the fort. There is a general store, a blacksmith, a church, a saloon." She kicked at a stone. "Most people are decent enough, but they do not think much of women ranchers. I have gotten used to being underestimated. Their loss." Holt glanced at her. "You strike me as someone who does not back down easy." "I cannot afford to. If I show weakness, someone will use it as an excuse to try to take my land. There are men in town who have been circling like vultures since my father died, waiting for me to fail so they can buy the ranch for pennies." Anger flickered across Holt's face. "Anyone in particular I should know about?" "Cyrus Brennan owns the land north of mine. He has been pressuring me to sell since the day after the funeral." She did not mention the way Brennan looked at her, the implication that his interest included more than just her property. "He is not dangerous, just persistent and unpleasant." Holt made a non-committal sound that suggested he was filing that information away. They walked in companionable silence for a while, and Natalie found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking. There was something compelling about the contrast between his rough exterior and the gentleness she had seen him show. He moved through the world like he expected trouble but hoped for peace. As they drew closer to Fort Lyon, they began to encounter other people heading toward town. Word of the wildfire had spread, and families from the outlying ranches were coming in to check on supplies and get news. Several people Natalie knew stopped to ask if she was all right, their eyes sliding curiously to Holt and then away when they met his steady gaze. "Natalie Morrison," a voice called out, and she turned to see Emma Hendricks riding toward her on a chestnut gelding. Emma was the closest thing Natalie had to a friend, the daughter of the neighboring ranch who understood the challenges of making a life in hard country. "Thank God you are safe. We saw the smoke and feared the worst." "It was close," Natalie admitted. "The ranch burned. I do not know how much is left." Emma's eyes widened with sympathy and then slid to Holt with open curiosity. "And who is this?" "Holt Kincaid. He helped me escape the fire." Natalie made the introduction quickly, not quite ready to examine why she felt oddly possessive of Holt's attention. "Then we owe you a debt of gratitude, Mr. Kincaid." Emma smiled warmly. "Are you newly arrived in Fort Lyon?" "Just passing through," Holt said, his tone polite but distant. They parted ways with Emma, promising to come check on Natalie later, and continued into Fort Lyon proper. The town was bustling with activity. People gathered in clusters talking about the fire and sharing news of damages. Natalie led the way to the stable where she boarded Juniper when she came to town and handed the mare over to the livery boy with instructions for her care. "Now what?" Holt asked, looking distinctly uncomfortable with the crowds pressing around them. "Now we get you that hot meal I promised, and I need to talk to the bank about what happens next with the ranch." The thought made her stomach churn. She had no idea how much damage had been done or what it would cost to rebuild. The ranch had been barely breaking even before the fire. Now it might be completely beyond her means to save. They made their way to the hotel dining room, where the owner, Mrs. Patterson, took one look at Natalie's soot-stained clothes and Holt's wild mountain man appearance and nearly refused them service. But Natalie stood her ground, and eventually they were seated at a corner table with plates of beef stew and fresh bread that tasted like heaven after yesterday's dried rations. "This is good," Holt said, attacking his food with single-minded focus. Natalie found she had no appetite, despite not having eaten a real meal in more than a day. Her mind was spinning through problems and possibilities, trying to figure out how to salvage something from the disaster. She had some savings, but not nearly enough to rebuild the house and barn. She would need to take out a loan, which meant convincing the bank she was a good risk. Which meant, "Stop," Holt said quietly. She looked up to find him watching her with those storm-gray eyes. "I can see your mind eating itself alive with worry. You cannot solve everything in the next 5 minutes. I have to try. I have to figure out what to do. What you have to do is eat something and catch your breath. The problems will still be there in an hour." He pushed his half-finished plate toward her. "Have some of mine if yours has gone cold." The simple kindness of the gesture made her throat tight. She picked up her spoon and forced herself to eat, letting the warmth of the stew settle her nerves. Holt was right. She needed to approach this methodically, not let panic make her decisions. After they finished eating, they walked together to the Fort Lyon Bank. Natalie had been hoping to speak to Mr. Grayson, the bank manager who had known her father, but instead found herself sitting across a desk from his assistant, a thin-faced man named Horace Petty, who looked at her with barely concealed skepticism. "Miss Morrison, I understand you have suffered a loss in the wildfire," Petty said, shuffling papers on his desk. "What exactly are you requesting from the bank?" "I need a loan to rebuild my house and barn. I have 300 acres of good grazing land and cattle that survived the fire. The ranch is a viable operation, it just needs new structures." Petty's expression suggested he doubted every word. "The bank is not in the habit of extending large loans to single women. It is simply too much risk. My father banked here for 17 years. He never missed a payment. Your father was an experienced rancher. You are, forgive me for being blunt, a young woman playing at ranch management." Petty folded his hands. "The responsible thing would be to sell the land while it still has value and relocate somewhere more suitable to your situation." Natalie felt her face flush with anger. "My situation is that I am a capable rancher who has been successfully managing that property for 3 months. I am not asking for charity. I am asking for a business loan that I fully intend to repay." The bank's position remains unchanged. Petty stood, clearly considering the meeting over. "I suggest you speak to your neighbors about selling. I am sure someone would be interested in acquiring your acreage." Holt had been standing silent near the door through this entire exchange, but now he moved forward, and there was something in the way he carried himself that made Petty take an involuntary step back. "She asked you for a loan," Holt said quietly. "Not your opinion on what she should do with her life. And you are?" Petty tried for condescension, but could not quite pull it off with Holt looming over him. "Someone who knows bad business when he sees it. That land is prime grazing territory. Anyone with sense would see it as a good investment. The bank has made its decision." Petty's voice had climbed an octave. "Now if you will both excuse me, I have other appointments." Natalie wanted to argue further, but Holt's hand on her elbow guided her firmly toward the door. Once outside, she pulled free and spun to face him. "Why did you do that?" "I was not finished." "Yes, you were. He had already made up his mind before you walked in that door. Probably has someone lined up to buy your land cheap." Holt's eyes were dark with anger. Arguing with him would just give him ammunition to paint you as emotional and unstable. She hated that he was right. "So what do I do now?" "Now you figure out another way. There is always another way." He looked down the street toward where the fort stood, its flag snapping in the wind. "You have friends in town? Someone you trust?" "Emma Hendricks, maybe. Her father is fair-minded." Natalie rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. But I do not want to beg favors from neighbors. I have been trying so hard to prove I can stand on my own. Standing on your own does not mean refusing help when you need it. Holt steered her away from the main street toward a quieter area behind the general store. Listen to me. You have been through hell in the last day. You are exhausted, you are grieving your losses, and you are trying to make major decisions from a place of fear. That is a recipe for mistakes. So what do you suggest? Come back to the ranch with me. Let us see what actually survived and what needs rebuilding. Make your decisions based on facts, not assumptions. He paused. I will help you. Natalie stared at him. You will what? Help you rebuild. I know construction. I know ranch work. I am not doing anything else important right now. He said it casually, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, like he was waiting for her to reject the offer. Why would you do that? You do not owe me anything. Maybe I am tired of living alone in the mountains. Maybe I want a reason to stay in one place for a while. His eyes met hers. Or maybe I just want to help someone who deserves it. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. I cannot pay you much. Not until I figure out the money situation. Did I ask for payment? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Feed me, give me a place to sleep, and I will consider us even. She should say no. She should maintain the independence she had fought so hard to establish. But standing there looking up at this mountain man who had already saved her life once, all she wanted was to say yes. All right, she said softly. Yes, I would be grateful for your help. Something shifted in Holt's expression, a wall coming down that she had not even realized was there. Then let us get some supplies and head back. Daylight is burning. They spent the rest of the afternoon gathering what they would need from the general store. Food staples, nails, a new hammer to replace whatever had been lost in the fire, rope, canvas for temporary shelter. The store owner, Mr. Jacobson, extended Natalie credit without question, which told her the whole town knew about the fire, and was offering what sympathy they could. As they were loading the supplies onto a mule Holt rented from the livery, a broad-shouldered man in expensive clothes approached them. Natalie recognized Cyrus Brennan immediately and felt her spine stiffen. Miss Morrison, Brennan said, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. I heard about your misfortune. Terrible business, terrible, Mr. Brennan. Natalie kept her voice neutral. I wanted you to know my offer to purchase your land still stands. In fact, given the circumstances, I would be willing to increase my price by 10%. It would give you a fresh start somewhere safer. I am not selling. Brennan's smile did not reach his eyes. Be reasonable, you have nothing left. No house, no equipment, barely any stock. Take my offer before the bank forecloses on you. The lady said she is not selling. Holt straightened from tying down the supplies, and Brennan seemed to notice him for the first time. And who are you? Someone who works for Miss Morrison. Holt's voice was mild, but there was steel underneath it, which means you are wasting her time and mine. Brennan's face flushed red. You want to be careful, friend. I have influence in this town. I do not care. Holt took a step forward, and despite being roughly the same height as Brennan, he seemed to loom over the other man through sheer presence. Now I believe you were leaving. For a moment, Natalie thought Brennan might actually try to start a fight, but then he stepped back and forced his smile back into place. We will speak again, Miss Morrison, when you have had time to see sense. He walked away, and Natalie let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Thank you. He makes my skin crawl. Men like that only understand force. Reasoning with them is pointless. Holt finished securing their supplies. You ready to head back? They rode out of Fort Lyon in the late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the prairie. The journey back to the ranch took several hours following the road, and as they drew closer, Natalie felt her dread building. She had seen the devastation from the mountain, but seeing it up close would be different. The sun was setting when they finally crested the rise that looked down on what remained of her home. Natalie stopped her horse and just stared, her throat closing up. The barn was completely gone, just a few charred posts still standing. The house was partially intact, the stone chimney and foundation still solid, but the roof had burned away and the wooden walls were blackened. The fences were gone, the equipment shed was gone, the chicken coop was nothing but ash. It is not as bad as it could be, Holt said quietly beside her. The stonework survived. That is a foundation to build on. It looks like the end of the world. It looks like a beginning if you choose to see it that way. He nudged his horse forward. Come on, let us set up camp and see what we have to work with. They made camp in what had been the yard, near the old well that still provided clear water. Holt moved with efficient purpose, setting up a canvas lean-to shelter, building a fire ring from stones, organizing their supplies. Natalie tried to help but found herself moving through a fog of exhaustion and grief. "Sit down before you fall down," Holt finally said, guiding her to a log near the fire. "I have this handled." She sat and watched him work, mesmerized by the smooth economy of his movements. He built a fire and set coffee to boil, then began preparing a simple meal from their supplies. The domesticity of it felt surreal given the devastation around them. "How are you so calm?" she asked. Holt looked up from the frying pan where he was heating beans. "I have seen worse. After some of the battles I was in, I learned that humans can survive and rebuild from almost anything. This is just buildings. You are alive, your land is still yours, your cattle are out there somewhere, everything else can be replaced. You make it sound so simple. The work will not be simple, but the is. You decide to rebuild, and then you do it one step at a time until it is done." He brought her a plate of food and a cup of coffee. "Eat. Tomorrow we start assessing what needs doing and make a plan." Natalie ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind already jumping ahead to the enormous task in front of her. When she finished, she found her bedroll and laid it out under the canvas shelter. Holt banked the fire and settled his own bedroll on the opposite side of the lean-to, giving her privacy but staying close enough to guard against any danger in the night. "Holt," she said into the darkness, "thank you for everything." "You are welcome." A pause. "Get some sleep, Natalie. Things will look better in the morning." She doubted that but closed her eyes anyway, and, surprisingly, sleep came quickly, pulling her down into dreamless dark. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of hard work that left Natalie exhausted but gave her little time to dwell on her losses. Holt proved to be everything he had promised and more, working from dawn until long after dark with a tireless determination that drove her to match his pace. They started by salvaging what they could from the ruins. The stone foundation and chimney of the house were solid, and Holt declared they could build a new structure using them as a base. They found tools that had survived in the root cellar, along with preserved food that would supplement their supplies. Holt rode out each day to check on the cattle and reported that most of the herd had survived by running ahead of the fire. 43 head, he said on the third day, looking satisfied. "They are scattered but intact. We can start rounding them up once we have the fences rebuilt." Natalie looked up from where she was sorting through charred wood, pulling out pieces that could still be used. Her hands were blistered despite the gloves, and her back ached, but she felt a grim satisfaction in the progress they were making. "How do you know so much about ranch work?" "Grew up on a farm in Missouri before the war. My father raised cattle and corn." Holt hefted a massive beam that would have taken 2 normal men to lift and carried it over to their growing pile of salvageable lumber. "After the war, I did not want to go back, so I joined the army instead, but I never forgot what I learned." It was the most he had shared about his past, and Natalie wanted to ask more, but his expression had closed off in that way that meant he was done talking about it. Instead, she said, "I am glad you know what you are doing, because I am mostly making this up as I go." That earned her a rare smile. "You are doing fine, better than fine. Most people would have given up by now." "I do not have the luxury of giving up." They worked together through the heat of the day, and Natalie found herself watching Holt when she thought he was not paying attention. His strength was mesmerizing, the way his muscles moved under his shirt as he lifted and carried and built. But it was more than just his physical power that drew her attention. It was the quiet competence he brought to every task, the way he seemed to know exactly what needed doing without wasting energy on unnecessary motion. In the evenings, after the work was done and they sat by the fire, eating whatever simple meal Holt had prepared, they talked. Natalie found herself sharing stories about her father, about growing up on the ranch, about her dreams for what the place could become. Holt listened more than he spoke, but when he did contribute, his words carried weight. "Your father would be proud of you," he said one night when she had been talking about her fears of failing to live up to his legacy. "Anyone can run a ranch when times are good. You are fighting to keep it when everything is against you. That takes real courage, or real stubbornness. Sometimes they are the same thing." He poked at the fire with a stick. "My father used to say that the difference between success and failure is just refusing to quit. Everything else is details." Was he right? About that, yes. About most other things, no. There was an old pain in his voice. "He wanted me to be a farmer like him. could not understand why I wanted more than just staying in one place for my whole life. We fought about it right up until I left to join the army. He died while I was gone, and we never reconciled. Natalie reached out without thinking and touched his hand. I am sorry. Holt looked down at where her fingers rested on his, and something shifted in his expression. His hand turned over, catching hers, his calloused palm warm against her skin. Life does not always give you the endings you want, but sometimes it gives you new beginnings instead. Their eyes met across the fire, and Natalie felt her breath catch. The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibility. For a long moment neither of them moved, and then Holt gently released her hand and stood up. I should check the perimeter before we settle in for the night, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Stay by the fire. He walked away into the darkness, and Natalie sat staring after him, her heart pounding. Something was building between them, something that went beyond gratitude or convenience. She could feel it in the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she was not looking, in the way he always positioned himself between her and any potential danger, in the careful way he avoided touching her except when necessary, like he did not trust himself if he started. She should be cautious, she told herself. She barely knew him. But her heart was not listening to reason. It had already decided that Holt Kincaid was someone worth taking a chance. The days continued to pass, and the ranch slowly took shape under their combined efforts. They rebuilt the fences first, creating pasture that would hold the cattle once they finished rounding them up. Holt worked on framing a new barn, while Natalie focused on clearing and preparing the house foundation. She had given up on getting a loan from the bank and instead wrote to her father's brother in Denver, asking if he could lend her money. She had no idea if he would respond or if he even still lived at the address she had. Emma Hendricks came to visit one afternoon, bringing fresh bread and vegetables from her family's garden. She took one look at the work in progress and then at Holt, who was shirtless in the heat, hammering boards into place with single-minded focus. Well, Emma said quietly to Natalie, her eyes dancing with mischief, I see you have acquired quite the hired hand. Natalie felt her cheeks flush. He has been very helpful. I am sure he has, Emma smiled. How much are you paying him? Just room and board. Interesting. Emma watched Holt for another moment. You know what the town is saying, do not you? I can imagine. Natalie forced herself not to care about the gossip. Let them talk. I am not judging. I am envious. Emma squeezed her hand. You look happier than I have seen you in months, Natalie, even with everything that has happened. I think maybe that is because of more than just having help with the ranch work. Before Natalie could respond, Holt approached them, having pulled his shirt back on. Madam, he said to Emma, polite but reserved. Mr. Kincaid. Emma's smile was warm. I was just telling Natalie how impressed I am with the progress you two have made. Still a long way to go. Holt looked at Natalie. We are almost out of nails. I should ride into town tomorrow and get more supplies. I will go with you, Natalie said quickly. The thought of him going to Fort Lyon without her made her inexplicably anxious. Emma took her leave shortly after, but not before whispering to Natalie, hold on to that one. Men like him do not come along often. That night, as they sat by the fire, Natalie found herself thinking about Emma's words. She looked across the flames at Holt, who was mending a bridle with quiet concentration, and felt her heart squeeze. She was falling for him. Maybe she had been falling for him since the moment he appeared on her doorstep. This mountain man who had ridden through smoke and fire to save her. Holt, she said, and he looked up. Can I ask you something? Always. What happens when the ranch is rebuilt? Will you go back to the mountains? His hands stilled on the leather. Do you want me to? No. The word came out more forcefully than she intended. I do not want you to go. I want you to stay. He set the bridle aside and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Natalie, I am not good at staying in one place. I have spent the last 3 years alone because I do not know how to be around people anymore. I am broken in ways I do not know how to fix. You do not seem broken to me. You seem like someone who has been hurt and learned to protect himself. She moved around the fire to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. I am not asking you to be something you are not. I am just asking you not to leave. Why? His gray eyes searched her face. Why does it matter? Because I care about you. She forced herself to be brave, to say what she was feeling. Because in the last few weeks you have become the most important person in my life. Because when I think about you leaving, I feel like I am losing something precious. Holt's breath caught, and then his hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. You do not know what you are saying. I am not the kind of man you should want. You are exactly the kind of man I want. Strong, honest, kind. Someone who does not need me to be anything other than what I am. She leaned into his touch. Someone who rode through fire to save me. Natalie, he whispered, and then he was kissing her, his lips claiming hers with a desperate hunger that told her he had been holding back for weeks. She kissed him back, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair, pulling him closer. He tasted like coffee and smoke and something wild, and she wanted more of it, more of him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Holt rested his forehead against hers. I do not know how to do this, how to be what you need. Then we will figure it out together. She kissed him again, softer this time. Stay with me, help me rebuild the ranch. Let us see where this goes. I want to. God, I want to. His arms came around her, pulling her close. But I am afraid I will hurt you. I am afraid I do not know how to be close to someone anymore. Then we will take it slow. We will take it one day at a time, just like rebuilding the ranch. She pulled back enough to look into his eyes. I am not afraid of your scars, Holt. I just want the chance to know you. He closed his eyes, and she could see the war he was fighting with himself. Then he opened them and nodded. All right, I will stay. For as long as you want me. Forever then, she said, only half joking. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming him from intimidating to almost boyish. Forever is a long time. Good. We have a lot of work to do. They sat together by the fire, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, and watched the stars come out over the ranch. For the first time since the fire, Natalie felt something like hope settling in her chest. The road ahead would be hard, but she would not be traveling it alone anymore. The next morning, they rode together into Fort Lyon to purchase supplies. Word had spread that Natalie Morrison had acquired a hired hand, and she could feel eyes following them as they moved through town. Some looks were curious, some were disapproving, but she held her head high and ignored them all. Holt stayed close beside her, a solid presence that made her feel braver than she was. They were loading supplies into the wagon they had borrowed when Cyrus Brennan approached again, this time with 2 men flanking him. Natalie recognized them as his ranch hands, both known for being more trouble than they were worth. Miss Morrison, Brennan said, his false smile in place. I see you are still refusing to face facts about your situation. My situation is fine, Mr. Brennan. Thank you for your concern. I do not think it is fine. I think you are being stubborn and foolish. He stepped closer, and his men moved with him. I also think you are being taken advantage of by this drifter you have hired. What do you really know about him? Enough. Holt's voice was quiet, but it cut through the street noise like a blade. And this is your last warning to leave her alone. Brennan's face flushed with anger. You do not tell me what to do, mountain man. This is my town. This is nobody's town. And the lady asked you to leave her be. Are you going to respect that, or do we have a problem? One of Brennan's men put his hand on his gun, and the street went quiet. Natalie felt ice slide down her spine. Holt, do not. But Holt had not moved, had not tensed, had not even acknowledged the threat. He simply looked at Brennan with those storm-gray eyes and waited. After a long, tense moment, Brennan laughed and stepped back. Not worth my time. But you should know, Miss Morrison, that the bank is going to foreclose on your property within the month. Mr. Petty was kind enough to inform me. So you can play at ranching all you want. But come September, that land will be mine. He walked away with his men, leaving Natalie standing frozen in shock. He is lying. He has to be lying. But Holt's grim expression told her he was not so sure. We should go talk to the bank, find out what the situation actually is. They found Mr. Grayson, the actual bank manager, in his office this time. He was an older man who had indeed known Natalie's father, and he looked uncomfortable when she asked about Brennan's claims. I am sorry, Miss Morrison. I did not realize Horace had been discussing your account with others. That was inappropriate. He pulled out a ledger. But the facts remain. Your father took out a loan 3 years ago to purchase additional stock. With the interest, you currently owe the bank $800, due at the end of September. If you cannot pay, we will have no choice but to foreclose. $800. Natalie felt the room spin. I did not know about any loan. My father never mentioned it. He probably did not want to worry you. He was making payments regularly until his death. Grayson looked genuinely sympathetic. I can give you until October 1st, but after that my hands are tied. Bank regulations. Outside, Natalie stood on the wooden sidewalk and tried to breathe. $800 was an impossible sum. Even if she sold every head of cattle she had, she would not come close to that amount. We will figure something out, Holt said. How? There is no way to get that kind of money in 6 weeks. She turned to him, fighting tears. I am going to lose the ranch. Everything my father worked for, everything we have been rebuilding, it is all for nothing. Holt pulled her into his arms, right there on the main street of Fort Lyon with everyone watching, and held her while she fought for control. Listen to me. We are not giving up. I have been thinking about this and I have an idea. What idea? The Army pays scouts well. Fort Lyon needs scouts for patrols going into the mountains. I could sign on for the next 6 weeks, work day and night if I have to, and earn most of what we need. Combined with what we get from selling some cattle, we can make the payment. Natalie pulled back to look at him. You said you were done with the Army. I said I was done killing for them. Scouting is different. It is just tracking and guiding. I can do that without compromising who I am. His hands framed her face. Let me do this. Let me help save what is yours. What is ours? She corrected. If you are staying, if we are doing this together, then it is ours. Something fierce and possessive flashed in his eyes. Ours, he agreed. Then let me do this for us. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and he kissed her forehead before striding off toward the fort to inquire about work. Natalie stood watching him go, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath her feet again. But this time, at least, she was not facing it alone. Holt was hired as a scout that same day, his experience and reputation speaking for itself. The commanding officer at Fort Lyon was happy to have someone who knew the mountain territory so well, and they immediately assigned him to a patrol leaving the next morning. I will be gone for 4 days. Holt told Natalie that evening as they made camp back at the ranch. Can you manage here alone? I have been managing alone for 3 months. I will be fine. She tried to keep the worry out of her voice. Just promise me you will be careful. Always am. He pulled her close and they stood together in the fading light, holding on to each other. When I get back, we need to talk about the future, about what we really want this to be between us. I already know what I want, do you? His eyes searched hers. Because what I want might scare you. I do not do anything halfway, Natalie. If we are doing this, if we are really building a life together, then I want all of it. I want to marry you, make this ranch ours legally, build something that will last. But that is a big ask for a woman who barely knows me. Her heart was racing. You want to marry me? I want a lot more than that, but we can start there. He smiled, that rare expression that transformed his entire face. What do you say? Think you can put up with a broken mountain man for the rest of your life? You are not broken. You are healing. She stood on her toes and kissed him. And yes, when this is all settled, when we have saved the ranch and figured out how to move forward, then yes, I will marry you. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she felt the promise in it. This was not some desperate attraction born from crisis. This was real, solid, something that could last. The next morning, Holt rode out with the patrol, and Natalie threw herself into work to keep from worrying. She spent the days continuing to clear debris, organizing their salvaged materials, and planning the construction that would come once they had the money to afford lumber and supplies. Emma came to visit again and helped her start a garden that would provide vegetables through the fall. You are glowing, Emma observed while they were planting beans. I take it things are going well with your mountain man? Natalie could not help the smile that spread across her face. He asked me to marry him. Emma squealed and hugged her. That is wonderful. When? After we save the ranch from foreclosure. We have some financial hurdles to clear first. She explained about the loan and their plan to earn enough to make the payment. Emma's expression turned serious. Be careful, Natalie. Cyrus Brennan is not going to take losing that land well. He has been planning to expand his holdings for years, and your ranch is key to his plans. What can he do? As long as we make the payment, the land stays mine. I do not know. Just be careful. Emma squeezed her hand. I do not trust him. Holt returned 4 days later, exhausted but with cash in his pocket. Got paid $20 for the patrol. 3 more trips like that, and we will have enough. They fell into a rhythm over the next weeks. Holt would leave on patrol for 3 or 4 days, earning money with the Army. When he was at the ranch, he worked nonstop on repairs and construction. Natalie handled the daily ranch work, managed the cattle, and slowly began to believe they might actually pull this off. But as August drew to a close and they got closer to having enough money, strange things began to happen. Their tool shed burned down one night, destroying valuable equipment. Several head of cattle disappeared, presumably stolen. Someone cut the new fences they had just finished, forcing them to spend days repairing the damage. This is not coincidence, Holt said grimly after they discovered the fence damage. Someone is sabotaging us, Brennan, Natalie said. It has to be, probably. but proving it is another matter. Holt examined the clean cuts in the fence post. This was done with purpose. They knew what would cost us the most time to repair. They filed a complaint with the sheriff, but without proof there was nothing he could do. The harassment continued. Supplies they had ordered went missing. Their water barrels were found smashed. Every setback cost them time and money they could not afford to lose. "He is trying to make sure we fail," Natalie said one night, her voice shaking with anger and exhaustion. "He wants us to miss the payment deadline. Then we will make sure we do not." Holt's jaw was set with determination. "I will take on extra patrols. We will sell more cattle, whatever it takes." In the end, they scraped together enough money by September 28th. It had cost them nearly everything. The cattle herd was down to 20 head. They had both lost weight from the stress and endless work. But they had $812 in cash, and on September 30th they walked into the Fort Lyon Bank together and placed the money on Mr. Grayson's desk. "Loan payment," Natalie said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "Paid in full." Grayson counted the money carefully, then stamped their loan papers with satisfaction. "Paid in full. The ranch is clear. Congratulations, Miss Morrison." They walked out of the bank into the bright afternoon sunshine, and Natalie felt tears streaming down her face. They had done it. Against every odd, they had saved the ranch. Holt pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face in his chest, shaking with relief and joy and exhaustion. "We did it," she whispered. "You did it. I just helped." He tilted her face up. "So what now?" She knew what he was really asking. "Now we go home and we finish building our house, and then we get married and start the rest of our lives." His smile could have lit up the entire territory. "Sounds like a plan." The wedding was small, just a handful of friends and neighbors at the simple church in Fort Lyon. Emma stood up with Natalie, and the fort's commanding officer, who had become friendly with Holt during his time as a scout, stood up with him. Natalie wore a simple blue dress that Emma had helped her make, and Holt wore clean clothes that made him look somehow both civilized and wild at the same time. When the minister asked if she took this man, Natalie looked into Holt's storm-gray eyes and said, "I do," with her whole heart. Their life together settled into something both peaceful and purposeful. The ranch slowly rebuilt itself over the following year. With Holt's strength and skill, they constructed a solid house that would stand for generations. The barn rose again, bigger and better than before. They bought more cattle and started breeding their herd back up. Holt took occasional work as a scout to bring in extra income, but mostly he focused on the ranch that was now legally half his. The first winter was hard but happy. They would sit together by the fire in their new house, Natalie reading aloud from books, while Holt carved or mended equipment, and she marveled at how complete her life had become. This man who had ridden through smoke and fire to save her had become her entire world. In the spring of 1881, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. Holt's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, then immediately became overprotective and worried. "I am not made of glass," she protested when he tried to take over all the heavy ranch work. "But you are carrying something precious, and I am not taking any chances." He kissed her soundly. "Humor me." Their son was born in December during a snowstorm that trapped them at the ranch for 3 days. Holt delivered the baby himself with steady hands and calm competence that came from having helped with farm animals for years. When he placed their son in Natalie's arms, both of them were crying. "Thomas," Natalie said, naming him after her father. "Thomas Kincaid. He is perfect," Holt whispered, staring at his son with wonder. "You are both perfect." Life moved forward with the kind of steady contentment that Natalie had never dared to dream of. They expanded the ranch, adding more land when a neighbor sold out. Thomas grew into a strong, curious child who followed his father everywhere. Holt proved to be a patient, loving father, teaching his son about the land and the animals with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. In 1883, they had a daughter they named Sarah. She had her father's gray eyes and her mother's determination, and from the moment she could walk, she was getting into everything. Holt doted on both children but had a special soft spot for his daughter, who could wrap him around her finger with a single smile. Cyrus Brennan never gave up trying to acquire their land, but his efforts grew more pathetic as the years passed and the Kincaid ranch thrived. Eventually, he overextended himself financially and lost his own ranch, moving away in disgrace. Natalie found she could not even summon any satisfaction over his downfall. She was too happy with her own life to spare energy on old enemies. Emma Hendricks married a schoolteacher from Fort Lyon and remained Natalie's closest friend. They would visit each other regularly, their children playing together while they talked about everything and nothing. Emma never missed an opportunity to remind Natalie that she had been right about Holt. "I told you to hold on to that one," Emma would say, watching Holt play with the children. "Best advice I ever gave you." The ranch grew and prospered over the years. By 1890, they had over 600 acres and 200 head of cattle. They hired on ranch hands to help with the work, and the Kincaid name became known throughout the region for fair dealing and quality livestock. But despite their success, Holt never lost his love of the mountains. Several times a year, he would take Thomas and later Sarah up into the high country, teaching them the skills he had learned during his years living alone. "I want them to know where I came from," he explained to Natalie. "I want them to understand that sometimes you have to go through fire to find what really matters." Natalie would watch them ride off together, her heart full of love for this family she had built with the mountain man who had saved her. She thought often about that terrible day when the wildfire had consumed everything she knew, about standing on her porch watching the smoke roll in. She had thought it was the end of everything. Instead, it had been the beginning of everything that mattered. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Holt took her back up the mountain to the cave where they had sheltered from the fire. They stood together at the entrance, looking out at the land that had been scarred by flame but had grown back stronger. "I never thanked you properly," Natalie said, leaning into his solid warmth. "For riding through the smoke to get me, for saving my life." "You saved mine right back," Holt replied, his arm tight around her waist. "I was just existing in those mountains, not living. You gave me a reason to live again. A family, a home, a purpose. We saved each other then. I suppose we did." He turned her to face him, his hands framing her face the way he had that first time he kissed her. "And I would do it all again, ride through any fire, face any danger if it meant finding my way to you." She kissed him, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude into it, and thought about how strange life was, how disaster could lead to blessing, how loss could lead to finding. How a wildfire that destroyed everything she had known had brought her the greatest gift of her life. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the steady rhythm of ranch life. Thomas grew into a young man with his father's size and strength, his mother's determination. At 19, he took over much of the ranch management, freeing Holt and Natalie to enjoy more leisure time together. Sarah, at 17, was already turning heads in Fort Lyon, but she seemed in no hurry to settle down, much more interested in helping her father with the horse breeding program they had started. "She has your stubbornness," Holt observed one evening, watching Sarah work with a particularly difficult colt. "She has yours too," Natalie countered, but she was smiling. "That is a dangerous combination." In 1895, when they had been married 16 years, Natalie found herself pregnant again, to everyone's surprise. At 40, she had not expected another child, but Holt was delighted. "One more to spoil," he said, his hand resting on her growing belly. "One more piece of us in the world." Their second son was born healthy and strong in the spring of 1896, and they named him Daniel. Thomas and Sarah adored their unexpected baby brother, and the house rang with laughter and chaos in a way Natalie had never imagined during those dark days after her father's death. Holt had grown gray in his beard, and lines had deepened around his eyes, but he was still as strong as ever, still the man who had ridden through fire to save her. He was gentler now, softened by years of love and family, but that core of strength remained. He was her rock, her partner, her great love. The 20th century arrived with promise and change. Fort Lyon was growing, becoming more of a real town than an outpost. Roads improved, technology advanced. Automobiles began appearing, though Holt viewed them with deep suspicion. The old Wild West was fading, becoming history, but the Kincaid Ranch endured. In 1905, Thomas married a lovely young woman from Denver and brought her home to the ranch. Plans were made to build them a house on the property, keeping the family together. Sarah had taken over the horse breeding entirely and was making a name for herself across Colorado. Daniel, at 9, was already showing signs of his father's talent with animals and the land. Natalie and Holt celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary surrounded by family and friends. The house they had built together was filled with people and noise and love. As she looked around at what they had created, at the children and grandchildren that bore witness to their love, Natalie felt profound gratitude. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, they sat together on the porch of their house. watching the stars come out over the mountains. It was the same view she had looked at 26 years ago when she first saw the smoke from the wildfire. But everything was different now. "Do you ever regret it?" Natalie asked quietly. "Giving up your freedom in the mountains to tie yourself to this place?" "To me?" Holt pulled her closer, and she settled against his side, fitting perfectly as she always had. "Not for a single second. That was not freedom I had up there. That was just running from pain. This is freedom. Having someone to love, a family to protect, work that matters. This is what I was always running toward. I just did not know it until I found you. I am glad you rode through the smoke to get me. Best decision I ever made." He kissed the top of her head. "Well, that and saying yes when you asked me to stay." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had been through fire together and come out stronger on the other side. The ranch stretched out around them in the darkness, solid and enduring, built on love and determination and the courage to rebuild when everything seemed lost. "Tell me again," their youngest Daniel would ask when he was older, wanting to hear the story of how his parents met. "Tell me about the fire." And Natalie would tell him about the wildfire that cut off the only road to her ranch, about being trapped with no way out, about the mountain man who appeared at her door and refused to let her face disaster alone. She would tell him about the journey through smoke and flame, about rebuilding from ashes, about falling in love in the midst of loss. But what she always ended with was this: "Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads to the best thing. That fire took everything I thought I needed, but it brought me everything I could ever want. It brought me your father." And Holt, listening from his chair by the fire, would always add, "And she gave me a reason to stop running, gave me a home." They lived to see their children grown and successful, to know grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch prospered through boom and bust, through drought and plenty, anchored by the love that had founded it. When Holt finally passed in 1923 at the age of 71, he died in his sleep with Natalie beside him, in the house they had built together, on the land they had saved together. Natalie lived another 5 years, staying sharp and active until the end. When her time came, she was surrounded by the family she and Holt had created, and her last words were about the day he had ridden through fire to save her. "Best day of my life," she whispered. "The day I met him." The Kincaid Ranch remained in the family for generations after, a testament to love forged in fire and strengthened by determination. And every generation heard the story of how it all began, with a wildfire and a mountain man and a woman who refused to give up on her dreams. It was a story of disaster turned to blessing, of two lost souls finding each other in the midst of chaos, of love that proved stronger than any flame. It was the story of how Natalie Morrison and Holt Kincaid built something that would last forever, starting from nothing but ashes and determination and hope. And it all began on that terrible, wonderful day in 1879, when wildfire cut off the only road to her ranch, and a mountain man rode straight through the smoke to get her.